Good morning. I hope the topic that is on your handout, which I think everybody has, doesn't shock any of you. But it's a subject that needs to be addressed. I only have to mention former President Bill Clinton, former Governor Eliot Spitzer, former Governor Goldschmidt, various mayors, police chiefs, former CEO of Boeing, military recruiters, senior classmen at the Air Force Academy, prison guards, pastors, priests, counselors, junior and high school teachers, both men and women, Boy Scout leaders, and many, many others, for you to see the breadth of this issue, sex and power in the workplace. Talking about sex and power in the workplace is not an easy topic. It's not a feel-good topic, but it is a vital topic. It needs to be talked about and addressed and looked at. In the world we live in, we cannot hide our heads from what is going on. Probably each of you in this room has a position of power in some level or other. You might have a power of position, but you probably also have the power of influence over others who look up to you. Whether that's in your family, whether that's in the workplace, in a place you volunteer, in your community. But what is power? First of all, it's the ability to make things happen. And it's the ability to stop things from happening or to divert them in a different direction. It's the ability to prevent change or cause change. Power is also having authority, it's having influence, it's having control. It's the ability to sway and to command. And it is also a trust, a responsibility, and a privilege. It can be a formal position, as I said, or it can be a place where you are looked up to and trusted. Abuse of power happens at every level in society. We saw it at the highest levels with Bill Clinton in the White House. We see it at lower levels of home health workers sexually abusing, raping 80 or 90-year-old women in their care. It's at every level of society. It happens when an employer takes advantage of an employee or someone he or she has a degree of power over. It also happens when someone who is vulnerable and hurting and needing counsel and help goes to a priest, a psychologist, a doctor that they trust. In light of how widespread the problem is, it's a bit naive of us to imagine that we are totally immune to the power of sexual desire and emotional need. This is part of our common humanity. But even if it's part of being a red-blooded human being, our essential response to abusing our power, again, that power of position or the power of influence, must be three things. It is never okay to take advantage of another to satisfy our own physical or emotional needs. Secondly, it is always our responsibility if we act out. We cannot blame the other person. Well, they enticed me, they did this, they did that. We have made a choice to go along with it. And thirdly, we must learn to manage our impulses and longings that can trip us up. In their book, Overcoming the Dark Side of Leadership, authors Gary McIntosh and Samuel Riemer discuss the paradox of personal dysfunction. And their contention is that all of us have a dark side, a hidden side, a subconscious side that often we are oblivious to. We're not aware that there are deep things within us that, given the right stresses, can trigger us into inappropriate behavior. Time magazine wrote 2 weeks ago about Eliot Spitzer. We're all very familiar, I think, with that photograph of Eliot Spitzer at his news conference. And in Time magazine, one of their authors, Kate Stinchfield, wrote an article called The Science of Risk-Taking, Why Smart People Do Reckless Things. And that's what it amounts to. And she lists a whole group of people, including someone we know if we've been in Oregon a while, Bob Packwood, Gary Hart, Bill Clinton, James McGreevy, Mark Foley, Larry Craig, and David Vitter, and many, many others. So there is something that propels us, men and women, to do things that are out of character and that are inappropriate. And this author, Kate Stinfield, says maybe it's chemical. And they go into, you know, what chemicals you may have or have too many of, and maybe that's what drives it. Maybe it's hubris, pride, arrogance of position, and maybe it's something deeper. Well, regardless of what prompts inappropriate behavior and acting out, knowing what to watch for in ourselves is very important. It's essential if we want to avoid falling into those same pits that these other people have. And I want to talk about the vulnerabilities of both genders, both men and women. I'm giving equal treatment to both. And how both men and women can abuse their power to attract the other, the one that they want to draw towards themselves. And I promise, as I said, equal treatment. Now, some feminine charms that attract men are pretty obvious. So this is for men. This is what men need to look out for. And then when I talk about how men attract women, this is what women need to watch out for. So I told you I'd be fair. Okay, what attracts men? Well, I think we'd all say, duh, don't we know? First of all, looks. A good-looking woman can make a man weak at the knees. Even though we have come so far in gender equality and so on and so forth, nevertheless, there is that primal attraction in a man finding a woman attractive. And to be honest, if a woman knows she is attractive, it often gives her a power rush to see men looking at her in that way. A woman's body is very appealing to a man. I believe we were designed that way, otherwise the propagation of the species would never happen. But as a man ages, not just young men, but I think as a man ages, there is also that powerful attraction to a young, firm, unwrinkled, unblemished body that they see. And in our culture, unlike in many others, men can see a lot more of women and their bodies than maybe in years gone by. But it's a powerful attraction for men to see a youthful, firm body. Now here's another one that attracts men, and that is perfume. When the sensory nerves get a whiff of a gorgeous perfume, and it's attached to a gorgeous woman, that, in a sense, a woman can lead a man literally by the nose because it smells so good and she looks so good, and there begin the fantasies. Then there's a neediness that some women exhibit that is very attractive to some men. They don't want a strong woman. They are attracted to a needy woman who perhaps they can feel like they're the rescuer, they're the protector, they're the hero. But some men who have a need to be dominant and in control also look for needy women who look to them. Here's another one, adoration. I remember a young man saying to me, this woman looks at me, and she was toxic. It was a toxic relationship. But he was ensnared. And he said, but she looks at me and she looks up at me and she says, I just adore you. And everything in me wanted to say to him, run, run. This is not a good thing. But who wouldn't be attracted to someone who adores you? Of course men would be. And I'm not talking about a normal, healthy relationship. I'm talking about things that are inappropriate and out of bounds for most ethical relationships. Then there's the strong personality. Some men are really attracted to women who are stimulating, they're funny, they're interesting to be around, you can talk together, you read the same books, you enjoy the same things. And so a strong, vibrant, capable woman can be a powerful attraction to some men. And then the last one that attracts men is a woman who's very sympathetic, who says, as you share something with her, oh, you know, I feel so badly for you. That must have been really hard. And, you know, I'm so sorry that your wife just doesn't seem to understand you. And, you know, you're starting to get on the slippery slope there. And the reason your wife perhaps doesn't understand you or doesn't respond with that sympathy is because she's heard it all before many times. And so when it's fresh to someone else, then they're very empathetic and sympathetic to you. Okay, those are hooks that women use consciously or unconsciously. Not every woman who fits that category is consciously trying to attract a man in an unhealthy way. I want to make that clear, because that would be insulting my own sex or my own gender. But unconsciously, some women do use these things, and some women use them consciously. What about the hooks that men use to grab women? Consciously or unconsciously, what attracts women to men? Here's a few. Well, first of all, let me give you a quote by Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger said, and this was several years ago, power is the ultimate aphrodisiac. That was before Viagra. Power is the ultimate aphrodisiac because power and prestige does attract some women. So does the position and status that men have. Again, for some women, because some men have the power to open doors for women socially and in terms of their career, to raise their self-esteem, to raise their standard of living if they're giving them gifts and so on. Another thing that attracts women are verbal strokes of approval, particularly if this woman that's around you and that you're dealing with is starved for compliments. If she is emotionally needy, which can come out of childhood stuff, it can come out of other experiences, but if she's emotionally needy and you give her verbal strokes and approval, oh, you're so smart, you handle that so well, you look so good, that color looks great on you. Now, you might just be not meaning anything at all, but if you've got an emotionally needy woman, she is powerfully attracted by those positive comments and affirmation. And then a man can consciously do this and say to someone, and it's getting on over the line, I have personal needs only you can meet. You know, again, if you're married, well, my wife doesn't really understand this, and you're so understanding and caring, and do you know what that does? That appeals to a woman's rescuing instinct or her mothering instinct. She wants to care for you, and oh, you poor thing, you know, I wouldn't treat you like that. You can see how those dynamics lead somewhere else. And then lastly, my wife doesn't understand me, and that a woman can take as flattery. It is flattery, but a woman can say, oh, you know, here's a man who really appreciates me. And so you're setting the stage for inappropriate behavior. So how do you keep yourself from succumbing to this? What preventative measures can you take? And that's on the back side of your handout. First of all, be aware of your own vulnerabilities. Ask yourself, out of the list that I gave and others, what could emotionally hook me? Or what does emotionally hook me? Am I hooked by a woman's body, by her perfume, by her neediness, by her personality? For a woman, are you hooked by a man's status, by his humor? I know for myself, I find men who are funny very attractive, and have to make sure, you know, that it doesn't go any further than just appreciating them as a person. So there are different things that emotionally attract us and that become our vulnerable place. So we need to ask ourselves, where am I vulnerable? And I would encourage you to ask yourself some quite personal questions in terms of looking at that hidden side where some of these things come from. Because Bill Clinton, Elliot Spitzer, and various other people, they just happen to be the most famous, didn't just come along and behave like that. That came out of something deep, perhaps something they'd never looked at, something they'd never grappled with or dealt with. And they're not alone. I just saw the whole list I read at the beginning. And we too can have a hidden side. And some of the things that can be deep down in us is maybe a history of sexual abuse as a child, or some other kind of abuse or family dysfunction. That can set a person up for an intense desire to belong, to be cared for, so that they don't have appropriate boundaries. Do I have unrealistic expectations for myself? Am I driving myself? Have I got to be the first? Have I got to be perfect? Have I got to achieve? You know, John F. Kennedy drove himself. Do you know why? According to one of the books I read, it was because his father set all his sons up to compete with one another to be the best. And his father was a womanizer, and John F. Kennedy followed in his footsteps. There were background things that probably nobody thought about. But there's this drive that can lead to issues that just come out in inappropriate ways because we never knew what was down inside of us. Now, I'm not a therapist, but I do know that when these things lurk in our background and we haven't either recognized their presence or dealt with them, given the right pressures, pressure at work, stress at home, financial stress, job loss stress, given the right stresses, when somebody comes along and there seems to be some sparks going, whether it's male or female, you can become vulnerable to inappropriate behavior. These things can be the internal drivers to act out of character and in ways that are risky to your life. Now, the second point is learn to recognize red flags. If you're around somebody and your heart pounds and you feel all hot and flustered, or you're filled with a desire to be around them a lot, more than you would normally with anybody else, you want to be in their presence, you think about them frequently, these are red flags that you need to look at. They're waving at you and saying, wait a minute, we're getting close to stuff here. Secondly, think about the consequences ahead of time if you bite the bait. If you bite the bait, what will happen? Think about this. The damage to yourself, your self-respect, your self-image, to your family, to your reputation, to your career. Think about the respect of your friends and colleagues that you would forfeit. Think about your self personally and, professionally. Think about the emotional pain. When I saw Elliot Spitzer's wife stand there and thought of their 3 teenage daughters and what it must have been like when he went home and had to face them, it's just overwhelming. And thinking about these things before, when the bait is dangling there and we're recognizing our attraction, is vital. And then the embarrassment of all that happened, and even on a work level, the work it is to fill your position. So what that does to your employer. Fourthly, set up boundaries. If you're serious about avoiding inappropriate behavior, take care of yourself. Take care of yourself physically. Get to work at the gym or wherever, work out your stress, your adrenaline, what's going on in your life, psychologically, spiritually, and with your family. Because constant exhaustion and stress affects our ability to have good judgment. It does. It just goes down. Secondly, have an ethical code for yourself. Now, this can be something you think through or you even write down, and probably afterwards you might throw away or you might carry it in your wallet. But it's important to think through, how do I want to conduct myself? What will I allow myself to do and what won't I allow myself to do? And people have different standards and people have different situations. You might travel with somebody of the opposite sex. You have to think through, okay, how am I going to handle this at the hotel we're staying in, and meals and drinks or whatever it is you do afterwards. What will you do? What won't you do? And if you're a person of faith, you'll find ethics within your belief system that will guide you. As a follower of Christ, I base my ethical foundation on Scripture, which is very clear about what to do in the face of temptation. Thirdly, work in a team. Avoid one-on-one situations as much as possible, particularly if you know that there's some attraction there. Fourthly, talk. Keep conversations to the work you share or general issues. You'll always talk about politics right now, and that might not be a good one either. But at least it's a public kind of thing. But don't talk about personal struggles. Put boundaries on that when you're talking with somebody who might be attracted to you or you're attracted to them. Fifth, be accountable to someone. Seek someone you can talk with early on when you sense some of these red flags that are going on. And make sure it's somebody who will keep things in confidence. But when you're wrestling with an unwise attraction, this is a time, if you have a friend who's a person of faith, to ask them to pray for you. I have a friend who prays for me every day and when I travel and so on. And I've also found that having a personal relationship with God has given me an added source of strength outside of myself that I wouldn't have otherwise. Number 6, learn to stand your ground and say no. Say no to yourself. And if you're in a situation where both of you realize you're attracted and it's gone a little far, say no to that other person too. Because what you want to ask yourself is this what I want for my life? Is this what I want in what I do? Is this the reputation I want? Is this who I am? Do I want this to mar my future and to hurt my family? So we need to say no to ourselves. And lastly, if you're honest with yourself and you admit your vulnerabilities and you put boundaries in place that are wise and sound and that you will commit to keeping, your chances of acting inappropriately and suffering the consequences, which are great, won't be nil. I'm not saying doing these 3 things, being honest with yourself, admitting your vulnerabilities, and setting up boundaries, will mean you will never face this kind of thing. You will, but the chances of it happening will be greatly diminished, and you will have a reputation that you can be proud of and that your family can be proud of. Thank you. We are going to take a few questions if you would like, and Aaron's going to lead that.
All right. You guys hear me okay? Do you guys have any questions for Poppy you'd like to ask?
Well, you can use the time to discuss.
Poppy, if you happen to have a friend who you see or you think they're maybe flirting or out of line, is that a responsibility? I'll just ask you, is that a responsibility of yours, and to what extent, and how would you handle it?
Well, I think
to repeat the question, sorry,
yes,
Poppy,
right,
is if you have a friend who shows an interest or is flirting with you, how do you handle that?
With you, with a third party, so you're
somebody
serving a friend and someone else.
Okay.
putting it in the workplace context, and somebody perhaps is under your management, I don't know, you guys and women know better than I do, but I assume something might be said that this is inappropriate. In terms of a personal friend, I would. And I would want someone to say to me, I think things are getting a little out of hand. You talk about him a lot. You seem to be very excited about her, or whatever. A friend picks up on these things. And really, isn't that what a friend is for, is to help us not make such damaging choices?
Yes.
Sometimes in the workplace, your demeanor, I'm a very outgoing person, and so it can be construed as the wrong actions, and sometimes females kind of feel jealousy or that it's inappropriate when it's really not. And the problems that I have dealing with is more on a level of female non-acceptance because of my outgoingness. I tend to know what you're talking about as far as recognizing when a coworker, a male coworker, tends to try to appeal to my motherly instincts, and so I kind of make light of it, or I, kind of make it casual and stuff like that, but how do I deal with these women that feel like I'm being inappropriate when I'm really not? It's just my outgoing personality.
Okay, so in the workplace scenario, people who are very outgoing sometimes have that competition with other women, and how do you deal with that situation where other women find you competing or appear to be competing for male attention?
I'm not sure I have a full answer, but I think communication is always the best way to go. And if you sense that, to talk with those women, whether they're your friends or colleagues, co-workers, competitors, I don't know. But I think communicating that, maybe putting some limits on your exuberance. And I know I tend to, I'll touch a man on the arm and stuff, but I think if I was in a workplace, I probably wouldn't do that. Maybe in a social group, I'd be warm and friendly and, in that way, but perhaps in a workplace, cut it down a bit. So communicate and cut it down. Maybe those are the two things. Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
You focused on opposite sex, and do you have any insights for same sex?
The reason I did that is because I was given a very short time and cut down from a much longer talk to just give the basics on this. I guess it's the same thing in that, if a man is attracted to a man, and we hear cases of sexual harassment where a man is not gay, but the other man is, and the same with women. And I think in the workplace, you all have your standards that you have to abide by of sexual harassment.
Okay. Any other questions? No? All right.
Thank you.
Wait, one more here.
Yes.
Wait, time for one more. So just a comment that no matter whether or not you're a man or a woman, you're going to be tempted out there in the world, and you got to recognize those red flags and be prepared for those kind of situations.
And that was my point in saying that we're all red-blooded people, at least some point in our lives, and that we do need to be prepared. We need to recognize that we're not above that possibility, that it can happen, and we need to come to a decision as to what behavior will I allow myself to get involved with. Because if we don't have that firmly fixed in our minds, then when the rush of attraction, sexual desire, whatever, you're away from home, you're traveling, nobody will know, we think, it can be overwhelming unless we get those things set in place mentally and spiritually, if we're a person of faith and we are certain that this is what we want. Even then, it can be difficult. But at least we've laid down our foundation or our fences around ourselves and say, this far, being friendly, chatting, all the rest of it, but no further. Yes?
I was thinking about this, and I thought, it's really, as Skip says, my talent is woo, right, Skip? I like to talk to other people. I like to be outgoing, bubbly. I enjoy that. But I know deep down inside I have a valued core, and I know that I am married, and I know that I want to stay married to this same person for the rest of my life, and I know that. I know that about me. I'm very solid about that. But I still recognize where a red flag might be. And I think that the part that I take one more step, and that is that because I know that, I share that with my husband. I know where I need more from him, and so I make sure to communicate that with him. Not that oh, I'm so attracted to this person. That's not it. But I like certain things, and so just as a nudge and a reminder, those things.
Yes, go ahead.
So yeah, just another comment. You recognize the fact that there are those temptations, excuse me, and when you see those red flags appear out in the world, you share that with your husband, your significant other, to make sure that they fulfill those empty spots in your life so that you aren't tempted to go outside of your marriage.
I really appreciate you saying that. It's very true that whether it's a husband with a wife or a wife with a husband or some other relationship, you know, where that person should be the one that you turn to meet your needs when they're not being met, to communicate with them and to give them that opportunity to say, you know, I recognize I'm vulnerable here because of ABC. Would you, you know, be more you know, kind or complimentary or available or whatever, because you're saying to that person, I want our relationship to be strengthened and not destroyed because of the weaknesses that are in it. So building that. Anything else? Well, thank you very much.
All right.